Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, and I hope you're all ready for the Oku event in just a few days. But while Kama will no doubt be the main attraction for many of you rolling, I think it's also important to take notice of the other top tier beauties who will be featured alongside her. And today we're doing just that by taking another look at the Queen of Thick herself, Scheherazade. My last analysis on Scheherazade was nearly 2 years ago, and since then, she's received 2 buffs in NA and has another buff on the way next year, which I have yet to cover. But is it really enough to make her viable in a very crowded class? Well, if you want to know if this caster is more than just eye candy, do me a favor and click that like button, subscribe, and ring my bell so that you can catch all of these servant spotlights as they go up and help out the channel. And now without further ado, let's take an extra close look at Scheherazade. Since her initial release, the caster of Nightless City has received 2 very strong buffs in NA. An NP interlude that increases her damage and gives her Noble Phantasm the additional effect of lowering enemy debuff resist, and a buff to her 3rd skill, which extends her Guts effect to the entire party. Both of these I have discussed in my original spotlight. However, in addition to those, she's also received another buff. Her 1st skill has been upgraded to Arabian Night Storyteller rank EX. And on top of the NP drain and the arts buff, it now also gives Scheherazade a 30% NP charge. Unfortunately, we won't be seeing this buff in North America until July of next year. But because it's so strong and because Scheherazade is going to have a raid up soon, I think it's worth discussing. Right off the bat, a 30% NP charge is massive, especially for Scheherazade, because it's tied to a skill that already increases her arts card effectiveness. As an AoE caster with an arts deck, Scheherazade wasn't exactly lacking in NP gain, but she also wasn't as consistent at NP spamming as the other arts casters like Anastasia and Murasaki, and this buff helps her out a lot when it comes to competing with them. Not only that, but the skill overall plays very well into her kit, since she does have a very high ranking territory creation, and she does specialize in stalling out enemies, including with her Noble Phantasm. Her 3rd skill also remains just as strong and relevant now as it was 2 years ago. A party-wide Gut can be a lifesaver in some challenge quests and boss fights where enemies have invincibility pierce. And if you happen to be up against a king enemy, Scheherazade can completely debilitate them with her 50% attack down debuff and a large amount of bonus damage. And given that this is FGO that we're talking about, there are a lot of servants that have the king trait. Also, fun fact, there are more female servants with the king trait than male. Truly, this is peak FGO game design. Getting back to Scheherazade, the question is, do these buffs address the issues that she had at release? To a large degree, yes, especially that NP charge. I won't reiterate too much since I did speak about her first 2 upgrades in my initial spotlight, but her party-wide Guts does give her great utility in stall teams, and it helps her fill a niche for supports who can provide Guts, which is very rare. The buff to her NP damage also helps her out with her otherwise abysmal damage against most enemies, by giving her a much better damage modifier than most of the other AoE arts casters. But if you recall in my original analysis, one of my biggest issues with Scheherazade was simply her lack of an NP charge. And her recent buff fixes just that. With a decent NP battery as part of her kit, she can now function very well as an arts farmer, just like Anna and Murasaki. She's capable of looping her Noble Phantasm in many team comps, and she can clear multiple waves of enemies, which gives her much more usability outside of just her anti-king niche. That being said though, she does still lag behind a few of the other AoE caster servants in terms of damage, especially due to her long skill cooldowns, and her support capabilities are extremely situational and not versatile at all. Her 2nd skill is also noticeably outdated, with a charm effect that only works on males, when ironically most of the king servants are female, and a defense buff that just feels out of place in her kit. As for team compositions, Scheherazade tends to work best when used offensively and when supported by servants who can buff her arts cards and her NP gain. Paracelsus, Mozart, Nero Bride, and Tamamo are good examples of strong allies for Scheherazade, because they not only buff her damage, but her NP spam as well. And of course, she can also loop with Castoria. For craft essences, go with some CEs that buff NP gain, arts card effectiveness, or provide utility like star generating. Painting Summer, Royal Icing, Annual General Meeting, and Formal Craft are all perfect choices. And finally, for command codes, none of a Merciful Gaze can be a good option because it increases damage against lawful enemies, and many King Servants also happen to be lawful alignment. Overall, the buffs to Scheherazade have been substantial, and she is in a much better spot now and in the future than she was at release. She can be a strong staller in some specific fights due to her party-wide guts and her NP drain. She has a good niche as an anti-King Servant, and her upcoming NP charge buff will make her significantly better at farming. But she does still suffer from being a bit too niche at times with her highly conditional debuffs. Her cooldowns are still an issue, and her overall DPS remains considerably low even though her NP damage is slightly higher than some of the other AoE casters. After everything is said and done, Scheherazade remains a B+ in my book. She is a solid farmer, and if you have a decent arts team, she can be quite consistent, but she doesn't do enough to set herself apart from most of the other farming casters, and her use cases where she does have an advantage over them are not very common. And those are my thoughts on Scheherazade. If you do happen to roll her, she can definitely come in handy for more than just dojin material. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. And also, if you haven't already, please do check out my Kama Spotlight, also linked in the description down below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe if you really enjoyed it. Follow us over on Twitter, chill with us on Twitch, and join the party over on our Discord, all linked in the description down below. And until next time, this is Sober Oni, signing out. Later.